All right, now to extract a service, first let's open up the terminal and create a new service using Angular CLI. So ng g s for service, and we call this post. So this creates two files inside the app folder. One is post.service.spec, which is our unit test file, and the other is post service. Note that as the warning says, Angular CLI does not register this class as a provider in app module. So when we use this for dependency injection, we're going to get the error no provider. So before we go any further, let's go to app.module. And here in the providers array, let's add post service. Okay. Now the second step. As you can see, Angular CLI adds this service in the app folder. In a real-world application, we often have tens of services, if not more. I personally don't like putting all these in the app folder. I prefer to create a folder called services and put all my services there. So here in the terminal, let's go to source/app, create a new folder called services. Now I already have this here, so let's just move these new files into this folder. So move post.service.star to services. Beautiful. Now let's go to our post component. The first thing I'm going to move to this service is this URL. This is the implementation detail about working with our backend. So cut. And now let's go to post.service. Move that here. Now here in the constructor, we need to inject the HTTP class. So private HTTP of type HTTP. And let's import this on the top. Beautiful. Now let's go back to post component. Next, here in the constructor, I'm going to replace this HTTP parameter with our service. So in our components, we should not inject the HTTP class. This is a different concern. Instead, we should work with our services. So let's change this to service of type post service. And also on the top, I'm going to remove this import statement. That's better. Now let's modify this ng on init method. So this first line where we call the get method of the HTTP class, I'm going to cut this back in post service, create a new method, get posts, paste that here. Now you know that this get method returns an observable of response. So we want to return this to the consumer of the service, which is our component. So return. Now back in the component, here we call this .service.get posts. That's all we had to do. Now look at the separation of concerns here. This component is telling the service that, hey, I want the posts. You go get the posts for me. I don't know how. I don't care about how you're going to get these, but give me the posts. And it's up to the service to figure out where to get these posts. Today, it's getting it from JSON placeholder. Tomorrow, we may decide to change the implementation and get the posts from Firebase. Or we may get them from the local storage in the browser. These are implementation details. When we change how we get the posts, our component is not affected. All these changes are encapsulated in one place, inside the service. And if we have 10 other components in our application that are using the service, again, those components will not be impacted by this change. So this is why we have separation of concerns. Just like a restaurant where we have different roles, in object-oriented programming, we have different classes, and each class should have a single responsibility. Now here's an exercise for you. I want you to pause the video and modify the other methods in this class to solve the issue with separation of concern. And then resume the video and see my solution. So here's the create post method. I'm going to get this line where we use the HTTP object, cut, back in post service, create a new method, create post. This method takes a post object, and here we simply return the observable from the post method of the HTTP object. Now back in the component, I'm going to call this .service.create post. and give it this post object. As simple as that. Now let's modify the update method. Once again, I'm going to get the first line, cut, back in the service, add a new method, update post, takes a post object, and returns this observable. Now back in the component, we're going to call this .service, .update post, and give it this post object. And the last change. Here in delete post, I'm going to get the first line, cut, back to the service, add a new method, delete post. Now here, all we need is the ID of a post. We don't need to pass the entire post object. So it's better to be more specific about the contract or the signature of this method. So we need an ID. Now we need to modify this. So instead of post.id, we need ID. And then return the observable. Finally, let's go back to our component and call this .service the delete post, and we give it post.id. So now with this refactoring, we moved all the code for working with the HTTP object outside this class. This class has only one responsibility, and that's the presentation logic behind our posts page. And also in post service, you can see that all these methods are about working with this HTTP endpoint. Now, if we go back to the browser, we get this error, no such file or directory, because we moved this service to a different folder and we forgot to update the import statement in app module. So let's go to app.module. On the top, we need to change the import statement. So get the service from services folder. Save, back in the browser, and our page is working beautifully.